The protagonist to a story is one of the most important elements. It's the character you're going to be spending the most time with, it's the one you're going to be the most invested in, hopefully. It's going to be the one that you're going to be in their head, so they need to be at least entertaining or interesting in some way. So I put out a poll on Instagram and here on the YouTube community page to find out what ruins fantasy protagonists for you. And oh boy, is there some good answers. I don't like the naturally good at complicated skill thing. It's okay with magic, but sword fighting, no. Now this I completely agree with. I think that's a really good point, and a good point to distinguish as well. If you're looking at something with magic where perhaps it's more intuitive and more connected to the being of the person rather than a skill that needs to be trained up, like sword fighting, it makes sense. But when it comes down to something like sword fighting, or any sort of practical skill, like could be like flying, riding a horse, it doesn't work if the character just gains these abilities really quickly to forward the plot. There needs to be a reasonable reason, or at least some sort of mentor or training section that makes sense over a good amount of time to be able to have the ability to gain these skills. Something that I do see a lot of the time is when an author includes some sort of training section for the main character, where perhaps they're learning sword fighting for 1 or 2 years under the tutelage of this expert. However, then at the end of the story, they're able to disarm knights that have been training their entire lives. Doesn't quite equate. You need to be training for more than 2 years to be able to take on someone like that. So there needs to be some sort of balance in their skill set and who they're taking on. Okay, this is an excellent one. This is one that is a pet peeve of mine. Childish behavior. I can understand when they are young, but in war it ruins a story for me. I was reading a really popular fantasy book and it had a character that was thousands of years old that basically threw a temper tantrum when he didn't get his way. I was like, why are you acting like a child when you've been existing for thousands of years? Surely some sort of maturity and realization that throwing a temper tantrum isn't going to get you what you want. And the second part of that, I can understand when they're young, in a war it ruins the story for me. That makes sense, and I think it's because of the tonal duality of that, of having this very young person in this very grown-up brutal situation. I think it's something that's very difficult to do. I do think it can be done really, really well. One good example recently that I read was a sort of Kaigan, and a really good example in this is Mamoru, who is this young boy who's brought up in this very traditional island. This sort of glorify war and look at it as this really honorable thing and what they were born to do. However, when he's thrust then into a battle, it really shows the brutality and the gritty horrificness of war. And that sort of duality in tone I think does work, but it's incredibly difficult to do. When they have a dumb name, that's fair. You know, if you're going to be reading it all the time, you don't want it to be like Squibbleorf. That's not necessarily an enticing name for reading regularly. I'm sorry if there's a Squiggleorf watching this. Another really common answer is the protagonist that just already knows everything. It's kind of a Mary Sue, which the dictionary definition of a Mary Sue is a type of female character who is depicted as unrealistically lacking in flaws or weaknesses. Like everything on this list, there's always going to be exceptions. There's going to be some type of way that can be done well. And I think a lot of the time readers are really talking about kind of your normal farm boy sort of trope where he's the chosen one and then he trains up really quickly and everything comes really easily and he doesn't really have any weaknesses or big flaws in his personality. He's very just heroic and very altruistic and just this overall really good person, but we can't connect to them because we don't see them then overcoming anything. We just see this person who's just frolicking through life, having a terrific time. And it's not that heroic, very morally good people can't be intriguing heroes. They definitely can. It's dependent on how that is then delved into and the fact that they become a person rather than an image or this sort of caricature of a hero. Perhaps they're too altruistic and then they push their own wants and desires aside. Perhaps they're incredibly set on their morals and very convinced that this is how it is, and then they learn that the world isn't just an easy decision and it isn't always obvious what the right choice is. It's putting these heroes and these very good people in very difficult situations where it's not clear which one is the right answer that makes for a really compelling character. For example, I know Kvothe is often named as one of these amazing, perfect to everything type characters. However, he is incredibly flawed. He does a lot of things that are just very questionable. He makes a lot of choices that you don't necessarily agree with. Despite the fact he is very talented and very good at what he does, doesn't mean that he's not an interesting character. Much like Sherlock Holmes, he's another one that doesn't really change as a person. He is very good at what he does. However, the cases that he gets involved in can affect the people around him. He's very standoffish because he is so set in his ways and very isolating in how he separates himself from everybody else. And he has an alcohol and drug problem. Despite the fact he is this really smart character, he's definitely flawed. When they are a 16-year-old girl and are in love with the 1,000-year-old vampire guy who looks hot and probably smells good too. Yeah, that's weird. Not a fan. I love that you had to include that he smells good too. It's an important part to build up that. Telling me the hero has greatness, fighting intelligence, great spell casting, then never letting the hero do any of those. 100%. I find this a lot with villains as well, where we just get told that they are this really great at this one thing. They're great and they're very knowledgeable and very full of wisdom. I would even stretch this into other personal traits as well, like just being kind. If a character's then told to being kind, I don't want to know that he's kind. I want to be shown that he's kind and come to that conclusion myself. It's very much this show don't tell rule in writing, where we want to see something happen. It means we can get connected, we can have evidence behind this fact, instead of just being told something like, just believe it, just trust me. It doesn't work the same as then seeing someone either be good and kind or strong in some way. I like that, it's a very good point. There is a couple just listing off some unfavorable traits in a person. I'm in the camp that you don't necessarily have to like the main character for them to be a good main character. They can still be very interesting. A lot of the time it's them overcoming these traits that makes an interesting character arc. So I don't think that having a unlikable main character at the start is necessarily a bad thing. I do think there is a line to this. Funnily enough, the most common was probably whiny, which makes complete sense to me, because if you are spending so much time in this character's head, you need them to be entertaining and not annoying. So there is a line to what traits that perhaps they are overcoming, or what type of person they start the story at. They still have to be interesting and entertaining if you're going to spend so much time in their point of view. Currently, there's big debates online over taking the misogyny out of Sokka from the new live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender TV show, because a lot of people are arguing that him overcoming his misogynistic patterns is something that really develops his character and shows that he is becoming a better person throughout the show. So by stripping that away from him in the show, are you then going to not replace it with anything? That means he might not go through an arc during the show, which will make a very bland and straightforward character. That's another comment that came up quite a lot, is the fact that characters don't change. Don't then become a better person, or a worse person in some cases. I think can be interesting as well. But don't go through any sort of arc throughout the story. And while there is cases where characters haven't gone through a sizable arc throughout the story, it's very rare and very difficult to do. I do think Sherlock Holmes again is a very good example, because he doesn't really change as a person, even if he does go through a lot during his cases. It doesn't necessarily affect him and who he is in a big sizable way. And it does raise the question then, what was this story for if the main character doesn't change? That needs to have an answer if the main character doesn't change. It needs to be a good answer. Taylor making a really good point. If you haven't checked out Made Between Pages yet, definitely go check out her channel. She makes some great videos, interviews a lot of authors, and she's just a really nice person. But she says, an extreme lack of agency. If they feel continuously pushed along by the story, never act on their own accord or think independently, it irks me greatly. 100%. Agency and this just sort of making them a person who is alive and does things really comes from the choices that the character makes. If they are just swept off into the story, it does feel like that could happen to anyone. And we don't really learn that much about the character. You learn so much about the characters depending on what choices they choose in different situations. This is Bilbo then chasing down after Gandalf deciding he does want to go on an adventure. And you might be thinking, but what about Frodo when he's just kind of given the ring and sort of swept along. That's very true, but his agency and his big decision at the start of the story is when he's at the Council of Elrond and he decides to still take up the ring and continue the journey himself. Both of these choices in these characters says a lot about them as individuals. And can you imagine if you took that choice away from Frodo and he was just pushed along on this journey, goes through all of it, chucks the ring in Mount Doom, and then returns home to the Shire. He's not learned anything, he's not really overcome anything, it's just kind of been a checklist for him. He needs to do this so he can get back home. If Frodo had been stripped of that choice, he would have lost all the strength and persistence that is in his character. Insta-love. Insta-crush is okay, but not love. I think this ties really heavily into what we're talking about earlier as well, about just gaining skills too quickly. It's very different than falling in love, I understand that. I more just mean we don't want to see these big important elements to the character just kind of brushed over or happen immediately. We want to see them go through struggle. We want them to have this slow building of this skill or this love and see this develop over time. We don't want it to just be, there we go, we're now like this. we're like this now. This is how it is. Here's another one that's a really good one as well. There's a couple different variations on this one, but what I really like about this comment is, finally, bad decision making for the sake of the plot. Okay if idiocy is an established character trait. Now that last line I think is a really important part. If a character is this bumbling fool and he's just kind of tripping his way through life and he makes a mistake, you're like, okay, that makes sense. He makes mistakes all the time. But if it's someone who is set as this very smart, very capable person, then it doesn't make any sense to go back on your character, and readers will definitely notice if you go back on your character to then forward the plot in any way. It needs to be a realistic decision for that individual character. Obvious plot armor, we all know it's there, but come on. Yes. Obviously, the chances of the main character dying in the first book is slim. I mean, that's going to be the main character, you would assume. It does happen, but it's very rare. However, that doesn't mean you can dangle them over the fire every 2 seconds and have them jump out the way the last second every single time, because then you sap all the tension away from these scenes that should be edge of your seat. Are they going to survive? This all goes back to execution. It depends on the types of scenes that you're setting up. If you are going to have these very regular confrontations between characters, you need to show that there can be loss. There can be situations where something is taken away from the main character. That can be side characters, it can be their morale. It needs to be something important to them that you take away to show that they can lose things. That means when the main character does come head to head with some sort of confrontation, you're concerned. You're on the edge of your seat because you know it can go badly. If you have a character that comes out pristine and fine every single time, it gets dull and it loses that sort of oomph that should be there. For me personally, what ruins a protagonist is when they are too simple. I thrive in stories that dig into complex character psyches, motivations, unusual decisions that first seem unexpected, but at the end exposing a key contradiction in their morals, etc. Think of Frodo's temptation in Lord of the Rings, or Molly's ambiguous loyalties in Gibson's Sprawl series, the first being Neuromancer. The entire point of a story is something will change. If a character is stagnant or is rather really superficial in their worldview and beliefs and morals, I will notice and my immersion will be broken. Think Nynaeve from Jordan's Wheel of Time series, or Elo from God Killer. I guess that's 2 things then, oops. 1, simplicity, or at least a lack of complications in character growth, and 2, the inability to immerse me and convince me these are humans, not ideas. That is just me though. What about you, Andrew? I completely agree. I think this is a good point to kind of wrap up on, is the importance of just making them an entertaining character to read. If they are very flat, if they don't have contradictions, struggles, things to overcome, and they're sort of more of a cardboard cutout as a person that just doesn't have a lot of depth, I think can really pull away and really destroy the immersion. For me, really connecting with a character and really seeing it from their point of view is one of the most important things. I don't need to like the character, I don't need to agree with the choices they make, but I need to understand why they are making those choices. I need to see what brought them to that point and why they are the way they are. And I need to be shown it. I don't want to just be told these things. I need to see them display the traits they supposedly have. And as this comment says, emotional connection. If you can connect to the character emotionally or relate in some way, it doesn't even need to be a big way, specifically in fantasy when everything can be very fantastical. You don't need to relate to their situation one for one, but you can relate how a similar situation made you feel similarly in your own life. This is far too serious a video for my channel. However, I thought this was really interesting. I really liked seeing lots of different people's opinions on this. I think there's some really good points made. And if you hear snoring in the background, it's not me. It's Meg. I couldn't get to everybody's comments, but I did read them all and there were some really good responses. So if you're looking for more, definitely check the community post. And also let me know in the comments below, what ruins a fantasy protagonist for you? Do you agree with these points? Do you disagree with any of them? I'd love to see your opinion. And let me know if you want to see more discussion videos like this. I think it'd be really interesting to delve into different aspects and hear from you guys what you think. And a huge thank you to my patrons who keep this channel alive. Over there is bonus videos, writing snippets of whatever I'm working on, and you also get to pick what books and then vote on what we read for the monthly book club. So thank you again, your support is huge. So thank you very much for watching.